She was the last true product of the studio system and the most famous woman in the world for decades. Behind the violet eyes and the diamonds lay documented pain, addiction, defiance, and secrets the legend often obscured. The real Elizabeth Taylor was more complicated, more damaged, and more courageous than the glamour suggested. These are the documented truths behind the icon. On December 12, 1942, an agreement was signed that legally bound a 10-year-old girl to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. While some biographical accounts place Elizabeth Taylor's entry into the studio system at age 9, surviving contract files from the Margaret Herrick Library document this December agreement as her official introduction to the MGM machine. Following a trial role in Lassie Come Home, her parents executed a formal 7-year contract in January 1943. Under this agreement, MGM acquired absolute ownership of Taylor's image, earnings, and professional choices. Studio head Louis B. Mayer ran a highly structured system where child actors were treated as valuable corporate assets. Education occurred inside a single-room schoolhouse built directly on the studio lot, isolating Taylor and other juvenile contract players from the outside world. Tutors were assigned directly to dressing rooms, ensuring that schooling never interfered with production schedules. Beyond her schedule and education, the studio policed her physical development. MGM physicians and nutritionists constantly monitored her weight and appearance to keep her camera ready. At age 14, the studio ordered her to gain weight for one role, then quickly shed it for the next. In her 1988 memoir, Elizabeth Takes Off, Taylor recalled the psychological toll of this scale-obsessed environment, describing a weekly routine of strict deprivation broken only by a single controlled pig-out. This systematic body surveillance fostered a lifelong battle with body image and physical anxiety. Yet, as her box office value soared, Taylor began to challenge this institutional dominance. Her early resistance culminated in 1956 during negotiations with the studio. She successfully secured an unprecedented clause granting her script approval rights, allowing her to veto early drafts and final shooting scripts. Fearing a mutiny from other contract players, MGM kept the concession entirely secret. This quiet victory represented the first major crack in the studio's absolute control, allowing Taylor to finally direct the course of her own career. In late 1944, during the production of National Velvet, 12-year-old Elizabeth Taylor fell from her horse while performing a jump. The young actress fractured her back, an injury that went largely undetected by studio doctors at the time, initiating a lifetime of severe spinal problems. This childhood accident began a quiet cascade of physical pain that she worked to hide behind a carefully constructed image of Hollywood glamour. By 1956, the damage required major surgery to remove diseased spinal discs, replacing them with bone grafts harvested from her own hip and pelvis. A subsequent boating accident in 1952 forced surgeons to excise 3 more vertebral discs, compounding her daily struggle with pain. In an era when clinical pain management routinely relied on heavy doses of newly synthesized opiates and tranquilizers, these repeated operations introduced Taylor to a clinical reliance on prescription drugs, standard for the medical culture of the time. This physical strain reached a public crisis in March 1960 during the promotion of Butterfield 8. While in London, 29-year-old Taylor contracted severe double pneumonia. Her condition deteriorated so rapidly that physicians performed an emergency tracheotomy to keep her airway open, placing her on a British-developed electronic ventilator for weeks. The medical emergency was so dire that 3 major wire services prematurely announced her death to the world. Though Taylor recovered and later showed her tracheotomy scar in public, the episode revealed the stark physical vulnerability beneath her celebrated beauty. The public consumed the drama of her near-death experience, But the daily reality of chronic pain and surgical recovery remained largely invisible behind the camera. The statistic of 8 marriages to 7 men became a defining metric of Elizabeth Taylor's public identity, transformed by the global press into a highly profitable commodity. This public consumption reached its peak in 1963 on the Rome set of Cleopatra, where Taylor began an affair with her co-star, Welsh actor Richard Burton. Because both stars were already married to other people, the relationship immediately sparked an unprecedented international media storm, with paparazzi tracking the couple across Italy. The moral backlash soon reached the highest levels of religious authority. The Vatican's official newspaper, L'Osservatore Romano, published a scathing editorial that openly condemned the liaison. The article labeled their relationship as erotic vagrancy and declared it an insult to the nobility of the hearth. Though Taylor later recalled this Vatican attack as profoundly humiliating, she refused to yield to external pressure. Following her divorce from Eddie Fisher, Taylor married Burton in March 1964. For the next decade, their relationship remained a source of constant public fascination, defined by a volatile mix of passionate reconciliations, public arguments, and intense media scrutiny. The marriage ended in divorce in June 1974, but the separation was brief. In October 1975, the couple remarried in a private ceremony in Botswana, only to divorce for the final time in July 1976. Biographers and media scholars note that while the press framed these tumultuous cycles as scandalous entertainment, Taylor's persistence reflected a stark defiance. She repeatedly chose to live her romantic life on her own terms, accepting global condemnation rather than hiding her personal choices behind a false front of Hollywood conformity. In late 1958, the sudden death of producer Mike Todd left Elizabeth Taylor widowed after only a year of marriage. In the immediate wake of this loss, she sought solace in her husband's closest friend, singer Eddie Fisher. Fisher, however, was already married to the popular actress Debbie Reynolds, then widely regarded as America's sweetheart. When the relationship between Taylor and Fisher became public in early 1959, the media response was immediate and venomous. Tabloids and mainstream newspapers alike seized on the narrative, branding Taylor with the home wrecker label. The speed with which the public turned against one of its most bankable stars revealed the fragile nature of studio-era popularity. For months, Taylor faced intense public condemnation, with the press framing her as a predatory temptress who had destroyed a picture-perfect American family. Debbie Reynolds received a massive wave of public sympathy, which further fueled the hostility directed at Taylor. This media campaign placed a disproportionate moral burden on Taylor, largely sparing Fisher from the same level of personal vitriol, even as his own career began to decline through the cancellation of his television variety show. While Fisher was gradually relegated to nightclub performances, the intense focus remained fixed on Taylor's alleged moral failures. Yet the archival record of this scandal illustrates a deeper truth about the nature of celebrity and media fabrication. The ferocious backlash threatened her standing with studio executives, but it failed to end her career. Behind the sensationalized front pages lay a highly calculated media machine that fed on conflict. The very industry that built Taylor up as a glamorous ideal found equal profit in her public dismantling. The narrative of the predatory homewrecker shifted as the public's appetite for scandal eventually gave way to a demand for her redemption. By the time Taylor signed her historic contract for Cleopatra in 1960, she had survived the peak of the hostility, showing extraordinary resilience. She proved that a star could endure a level of gendered condemnation that would have destroyed previous generations of actors, transitioning from a target of moral panic back into an indispensable box office force. The overlapping pressures of chronic physical pain, deep personal grief, and the relentless scrutiny of global fame eventually took a severe toll. Throughout the mid to late 20th century, the medical community routinely treated long-term pain and anxiety with heavy prescriptions of synthetic opioids and tranquilizers. For Taylor, whose body had been subjected to major spinal surgeries and traumatic illnesses, this clinical reliance gradually evolved into a documented dependence on both prescription drugs and alcohol. The private crisis culminated in late 1978. Following a direct intervention by her family and close friends, Taylor agreed to enter her first rehabilitation program at the Long Beach Naval Hospital. Though she sought to reclaim control over her life, the recovery path was not linear. In December 1983, at the age of 51, she took the highly unusual step of checking herself into the Betty Ford Center for a 7-week inpatient stay, openly acknowledging her addiction to prescription painkillers and alcohol. 5 years later, in 1988, a relapse forced her to return to the clinic for a second round of treatment. Rather than hiding her battles behind studio-fabricated excuses of exhaustion, Taylor chose complete public honesty. In her 1988 memoir, Elizabeth Takes Off, she wrote candidly about her chemical dependency and the realities of daily recovery. Because of this transparency, film historians and medical advocates widely identify Taylor as one of the first major Hollywood stars to enter rehabilitation openly. By refusing to hide her vulnerability, she began to dismantle the intense social stigma surrounding addiction, proving that survival required confronting the struggle in the light. By the mid-1980s, a new crisis was quietly devastating communities across America, met largely with institutional silence and public terror. In 1985, as the medical community struggled to secure federal attention for the escalating HIV and AIDS epidemic, Elizabeth Taylor chose to step into the void. At the time, public fear and moral judgment had isolated those diagnosed, leaving patients to die in near-complete abandonment. Taylor worked with Dr. Michael Gottlieb to establish the National AIDS Research Foundation in California. By September 1985, this organization merged with Dr. Matilde Krim's New York-based group to form the American Foundation for AIDS Research, known as AMFAR. Taylor accepted the role of founding national chairman, committing her global visibility to a disease most public figures refused to name. Her involvement was immediately confrontational. In September 1985, she chaired the Commitment to Life dinner for the AIDS Project Los Angeles. The benefit drew over 2,500 attendees and raised a verified $1.3 million, proving that Hollywood's philanthropic resources could be mobilized for the cause. Taylor deliberately insisted on centering the evening around people living with the disease, bringing patients themselves into a room filled with corporate and entertainment executives who had previously ignored them. When her close friend Rock Hudson publicly revealed his diagnosis and donated $250,000 to AMFAR shortly before his death in October 1985, the reality of the crisis struck the heart of the entertainment industry. Taylor's advocacy quickly moved beyond charity galas into the halls of government. In 1986, she took the witness stand before a United States Senate committee, demanding rapid federal funding for therapeutic research and compassionate medical treatment. The following year, she addressed the National Press Club in Washington, directly challenging the political establishment's indifference. Her targeted lobbying eventually helped build the bipartisan support required to pass the landmark Ryan White Care Act in 1990, securing federal assistance for children and families affected by the epidemic. To ensure direct aid reached those on the ground, Taylor established the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation in 1991, distributing millions of dollars to local clinics and grassroots prevention programs worldwide. While popular media accounts frequently cite a total of $50 million raised directly by her efforts, historians and financial audits focus on the structured pipelines of funding she established, including her later commitment to direct a portion of her corporate licensing revenues to the cause. For Taylor, this was not a temporary charitable interest. Biographer J. Randy Taraborelli and Taylor's own late career reflections identify this sustained struggle as the most important work of her entire life, a final act of defiance, where she successfully turned the machinery of her own fame into a shield for the ignored. While the press remained fixed on her diamonds and marriages, a quieter record of private assistance defined her personal relationship. In her memoir, Taylor recalled quietly paying the medical bills of friends in crisis and opening her homes to those left adrift after sudden tragedies, such as the loss of Mike Todd. Biographers note that she regularly extended financial help and housing to struggling entertainment colleagues, deliberately keeping these gestures out of the trade papers. This quiet, practical support stood in stark contrast to her pampered star persona. For Taylor, fierce loyalty to her inner circle was not a public relations strategy, but a fundamental personal obligation. While Taylor quietly supported others, she carried her own compounding losses away from the cameras. The death of Mike Todd in a plane crash on December 31, 1958, began a lifetime of private mourning. Over the following decades, her closest confidants died one by one. Montgomery Clift in 1966, Richard Burton in 1984, and Rock Hudson in 1985. In her letters and personal memoirs, Taylor often wrote about the quiet isolation that settled over her once the crowds dispersed. This documented record exposes the sharp contrast of her existence. For 50 years, she remained one of the most heavily photographed women in the world, constantly surrounded by assistants, husbands, and admirers. Yet behind the public spectacle, her personal papers reveal a woman navigating her daily life in a quiet space shaped by the permanent absence of those she loved most. Elizabeth Taylor systematically converted her global celebrity into a structured business empire, proving that a star could wield fame as a precise tool of personal agency. She recognized that her public image, long policed by studio executives, was a commodity she could directly control and license. This strategic shift redefined the economics of celebrity branding. In 1984, Taylor partnered with Elizabeth Arden to launch White Diamonds, a floral perfume that established a new template for public figures in the beauty industry. She expanded her commercial portfolio in 1995 with the development of Passion, creating a highly lucrative franchise of licensed products. Rather than accepting passive endorsement roles, Taylor actively directed the marketing, design, and formulation of her brand, demonstrating how personal appeal could be translated into a lasting corporate enterprise. Through these business ventures, she secured absolute financial independence, ensuring her name and likeness served her own purposes. This self-directed authority defined her final decades. When Taylor died on March 23, 2011, at the age of 79, she left behind a legacy of complete self-determination. By successfully reclaiming her image, she had outlasted the restrictive studio system that made her by more than half a century, transitioning from a child actor owned by MGM into the sole controller of her own legend. Today, the blueprint Elizabeth Taylor created defines the modern celebrity empire. Yet her deepest legacy isn't the business she built. It is how she weaponized her fame to save lives when the world looked away. She proved that the ultimate power of being watched is the choice of where you shine the light. What do you think of her lasting impact? Share your thoughts below.
How does one of the most glamorous women in Hollywood history become notorious for her lack of basic self-care? How did someone with unlimited access to luxury, beauty products, and stylists develop habits that would make even the most laid-back person cringe?
Did you hear that?
She rarely brushed her teeth. Would you believe that despite being one of the most exotic women in Hollywood, Elizabeth Taylor wasn't exactly big on brushing her teeth? But you don't have to take my word for it. People who were around her, including close friends and insiders, have talked about how her dental hygiene was, well, not great. She apparently didn't brush her teeth regularly, and as you can probably guess, that led to some serious bad breath. We're not talking about the occasional "I just woke up" morning breath. This was something strong enough that people noticed, talked about it, and were both shocked and disgusted by it. Now, you'd think she'd be all about keeping every part of herself pristine, but apparently that just didn't extend to her teeth. And this wasn't just a one-time thing. There were consistent reports that she neglected her oral hygiene for years. Compare that to other Hollywood stars of her time, like Audrey Hepburn or Grace Kelly, who were known for being incredibly meticulous about their cleanliness. Even Marilyn Monroe, who had a messy personal life, was obsessed with her appearance and hygiene. But Taylor? She just didn't seem to care as much when it came to brushing her teeth. Now, whether this was laziness, bad habits, or just a lack of concern, who knows? But it's wild to think that someone so glamorous could have something so simple completely overlooked. Toxic love for food. Let's get one thing straight, Elizabeth Taylor loved food. And unlike other foodies who could eat just about anything, Taylor was the more choosy type. She was all about rich, heavy, indulgent meals. So basically, big steaks, buttery mashed potatoes, fried chicken, chocolate cake, the kind of food that makes you want to take a nap right after eating. Now, for most other people, these kinds of meals are only for special occasions, but for Taylor, it was a regular Tuesday dinner. Oh, and just in case you don't think this is so glamorous, well, it gets worse. Not only did she have the habit of eating heavy meals, she mixed that up with the habit of eating in bed, a lot. And as you can imagine, this is already a recipe for a hygiene disaster. She'd lounge around with a tray of food, enjoying her meals while watching TV or reading. But hey, that's not too unusual, right? I mean, who doesn't love a late-night snack in bed? But there is one nasty difference, though. Even right after eating, she wouldn't always clean up after herself. Crumbs, bits of food, even half-eaten leftovers would sometimes just be left there. Some people close to her claimed her bed could get pretty messy, with food remnants sticking around longer than they should. And it wasn't just her bed. She wasn't overly concerned about post-meal hygiene in general. While most people would wipe their hands or freshen up after eating something greasy, she wasn't always in a rush to do that. If she was enjoying her meal, hygiene wasn't exactly a priority. Some insiders even said she could go straight from a heavy meal to lounging around, still covered in traces of whatever she just ate. For someone who looked so polished on screen, it's kind of wild to imagine her surrounded by food scraps in bed. It just goes to show that Hollywood is often just what we see in front of the cameras. Behind the scenes, it was a different story. Messy bathroom habits. When it comes to bathroom habits, let's just say it wasn't all diamonds and perfume for Elizabeth Taylor. There were rumors, and not just from random gossip, but from people who actually worked for her, that she wasn't exactly the cleanest person in the bathroom. Some housekeepers and close associates supposedly had to deal with some pretty unpleasant messes. We're talking about everything from unflushed toilets to used tissues and towels just lying around. The kind of stuff that, let's be honest, you wouldn't expect from someone who basically defined beauty and sophistication. But again, all these weren't just about being a little messy. There were stories that her bathrooms could sometimes be really unsanitary. Some people said she would leave makeup-stained towels everywhere, old cosmetics cluttering the counters, and even dirty laundry piling up. On top of all that, she also wasn't in a rush to clean up spills, whether it was powder, lotions, or even worse, bodily fluids. Yeah, not the image you picture when you think of Elizabeth Taylor, right? And here's where it gets a little sad. Some of this might have been connected to her health issues. You see, Taylor struggled with a lot of medical problems throughout her life, including chronic pain and mobility issues, especially later on. If she wasn't feeling well, it makes sense that she might not have been keeping up with cleaning or bathroom hygiene the way most people would. That said, some accounts suggest this wasn't just an issue in her later years. There were reports of her being messy even when she was younger and more physically active, so it could have just been a lifelong habit. Either way, it's a side of her that most people wouldn't expect, especially since she always looked so put together in public. Sweat and perfumes. It would probably come as a shock to you to know that Elizabeth Taylor was not exactly the killer damsel we saw on screens. One of her most famous unhygienic traits was sweating a lot and covering up with perfumes. The mixture was far from savory. There were reports from people who worked closely with her that she had a problem with excessive sweating. And I know what you're thinking. Sweating isn't exactly uncommon. Especially under hot studio lights or in heavy costumes, it's understandable. But Taylor wasn't just dealing with the occasional perspiration. She apparently sweat a lot. Some insiders even claimed that her body odor could be noticeable, especially after long hours on set or during social events. Now, here's where it gets worse. Instead of hopping in the shower or freshening up with a quick wash, Taylor had a habit of just masking the smell with perfume. And not just a little spritz. We're talking layers of strong, expensive fragrances. She was famous for her love of perfume. She even had her own line later in life, but according to some, she used it less as an accessory and more as a substitute for bathing. Can you imagine? Expensive French perfume mixed with layers of sweat? That's not exactly the fresh, clean scent you'd expect from a Hollywood icon. This wasn't just something people speculated about. There were actual accounts from co-stars and assistants who noticed the overpowering combination of body odor and perfume. What makes this even more surprising is how polished and put together she always looked in public. On the red carpet, she was flawless. Glowing skin, glamorous gowns, perfectly styled hair. But behind the scenes, it was a different story. She may have looked like a queen, but she definitely didn't always smell like one. Poor hair care. Now, you can't even hate or disagree with the fact that Elizabeth Taylor had some of the most iconic hair in Hollywood. Thick, dark, and always styled to perfection. But what you don't know is that a lot of the time it wasn't exactly clean. There were reports that Taylor would go days without washing her hair, and not just when she was older or sick. This was a habit she had throughout much of her life. Instead of regularly washing and maintaining her hair, she often relied on wigs and hairpieces to keep up her glamorous image. Now, wigs were pretty common in old Hollywood. Stars used them all the time to avoid constant heat styling and damage. But with Taylor, it seemed like wigs weren't just a convenience. They were a way to avoid dealing with her real hair. Some stylists claimed that when they did have to style her natural hair, it wasn't always in the best condition. Oily, tangled, sometimes even smelling a little off. One hairstylist reportedly had to work extra hard to freshen up her scalp before big events because her hair had gone so long without a wash. Another insider mentioned that dry shampoo, or whatever the old Hollywood equivalent was, became a lifesaver on set because Taylor didn't always keep up with regular washing. What makes this even crazier is that she always looked flawless on screen. Whether she was rocking a big dramatic updo or her signature curls, you'd never guess that her hair underneath might not have been the cleanest. It's just another example of how Hollywood magic can make even the messiest habits disappear, at least in front of the cameras. Wearing dirty clothes. This is kind of ironic because Taylor was a fashion icon, and that's exactly what makes it hard to believe she would go days without changing her clothes. Now, this wasn't just about re-wearing a favorite dress. That's no big deal. Plenty of people do that. The issue was that she sometimes wore things for days at a time, even after sleeping, eating, and lounging around in them. One of the biggest examples of this was her love for nightgowns and robes. Taylor adored silky, luxurious nightwear and was known to spend long hours, sometimes entire days, lounging in them. But instead of swapping them out for fresh ones, she would keep wearing the same robe or nightgown for multiple days, even after eating meals in bed, sweating through them or spilling drinks on them. People close to her have mentioned that she could be seen in the same nightwear day after day, sometimes until someone else stepped in and suggested a change. But it didn't stop with sleepwear. Taylor was also known to re-wear fancy gowns and dresses without washing them, even if they'd been through long nights of sweating under bright lights or dancing at glamorous events. Back in the day, a lot of Hollywood stars had their dresses professionally cleaned between wears, but Taylor didn't always bother. There were stories from stylists who worked with her saying they sometimes had to spray down or freshen up her outfits rather than washing them properly. She'd sometimes just throw a fur coat or a shawl over an outfit that wasn't exactly fresh and head out the door. At the end of the day, Taylor cared more about comfort than strict hygiene when it came to clothing. If she liked how something felt, she wasn't in a rush to swap it out, even if it needed a wash. Whether it was a silky robe covered in crumbs, a nightgown worn for days, or a fancy dress that had already seen too many parties, Taylor was never one to stress over keeping things perfectly clean. It's a surprising contrast to the perfectly polished image she had in public, but it just goes to show that even Hollywood icons have their not-so-glamorous habits behind the scenes. Now, after all of these shocking revelations, one may ask, why exactly did Taylor have such bad hygiene? Well, there are a lot of theories around that, and some of them might not be so surprising. Health issues. In her later years, Elizabeth Taylor's hygiene habits reportedly became even worse, largely due to her declining health. She battled a long list of medical issues, including chronic pain, scoliosis, heart problems, and several back injuries that made movement incredibly difficult. Because of this, simple tasks like bathing, grooming, and even changing clothes regularly became a challenge. People close to her have said that as her mobility worsened, she would sometimes go days without bathing. Not necessarily because she didn't want to, but because it was just too painful or exhausting. It's easy to see how this would become an issue, especially since she had already been known for being a little lax when it came to hygiene. By the time she was in a wheelchair, regular showers and hair washing weren't a top priority. Her caretakers and assistants had to step in and help manage things. There were accounts of them using wet wipes or sponge baths instead of full showers, just to keep her feeling somewhat fresh. Dry shampoos and heavy perfumes were often used to cover up the lack of regular washing. Some close friends even mentioned that her hygiene decline was noticeable, but because she was Elizabeth Taylor, the legendary actress and icon, no one really called her out on it. It's kind of sad to think about, especially since she had once been the epitome of glamour. But at that point in her life, she was battling so many serious health problems that hygiene became secondary to just getting through the day. The Hollywood goddess who once turned heads with her beauty was now struggling behind closed doors, relying on others to maintain even the basics of cleanliness. She was overly pampered. Elizabeth Taylor was Hollywood royalty from the time she was a kid, and like many stars who grew up in the spotlight, she never really had to take care of the little things herself, especially when it came to hygiene. Think about it. She became famous at just 12 years old with National Velvet, and from that moment on, she had an army of people making sure she always looked perfect. Hairstylists, makeup artists, wardrobe assistants, everyone was constantly fussing over her, touching her up, and making sure she was red carpet ready at all times. If a strand of hair was out of place, someone fixed it for her. If her dress had a wrinkle, someone else smoothed it out. All of these treatments would eventually take a toll. When you grow up with people constantly handling your appearance, you never really learn how to take care of yourself in the way that most people do. Taylor likely never had to worry about washing her own clothes, brushing out tangles in her hair, or making sure her bed sheets were clean. There was always someone who would take care of it for her. If she wanted a fresh dress, she didn't have to think about washing the one she just wore. She just picked out another from her endless wardrobe, and an assistant would eventually deal with the laundry. If her sheets were dirty from eating in bed, someone else was responsible for changing them. She never had to lift a finger, so she probably never even thought about whether things were clean or not. So because of this, Taylor probably never developed strong personal hygiene habits, not because she was lazy, but because she never had to. When someone grows up in an environment where everything is taken care of for them, they don't have the same awareness about cleanliness as someone who has to do it themselves. For example, most people know that if they don't wash their laundry, their clothes will start to smell. But Taylor? That was never a problem she had to deal with. She could re-wear the same nightgown or robe for days, and if it got dirty, someone else would eventually handle it. The same thing applied to her hair care and bathing habits. If a stylist was constantly working on her hair, she didn't need to wash it herself regularly. If she had a personal assistant who could freshen her up with perfume or a quick touch-up before public appearances, she didn't have to worry as much about showering. Over time, this likely led to a more relaxed attitude about hygiene, because it was never her responsibility to maintain it. This kind of treatment didn't just stop when she became an adult. It followed her throughout her entire life. Taylor was one of the most high-maintenance stars in Hollywood, but that didn't mean she maintained herself. Instead, she had an entire team of people handling her every need, from dressing her to styling her to even helping her get around when her health started to decline. By the time she was older and struggling with mobility issues, her hygiene habits had already been so relaxed that they only got worse. Without assistance to help her, she probably wouldn't have bothered to change clothes, freshen up, or keep things tidy at all. Elizabeth Taylor wasn't necessarily lazy about hygiene. She was just so used to being taken care of that she never really had to think about it. When you grow up with people handling every little detail of your life, you don't develop the same habits as someone who has to do it all themselves. So, did she care about hygiene? Probably not as much as most people would expect from a Hollywood icon. But did she care about looking fabulous? Absolutely. She just let everyone else handle the cleanliness part for her. She was battling addictions. At this point in the video, it shouldn't come as much of a surprise that Taylor struggled with addiction to food, alcohol, and painkillers, and like many people with compulsive tendencies, she often neglected self-care. When she was caught up in binge eating, drinking heavily, or relying on painkillers, hygiene was simply not a priority. Addiction often leads to fatigue and depression, both of which make it harder to keep up with daily grooming, and Taylor's habits reflected that pattern. Her relationship with food was intense. As we've learned, she didn't just enjoy rich, heavy meals, she indulged in them to excess, often eating in bed and leaving behind crumbs, stains, and wrappers without much concern. It wasn't unusual for her to wear the same food-stained robe or nightgown for days. At her heaviest, she admitted to consuming large quantities of food in a single sitting, once describing a meal where she ate 2 steaks, a whole lobster, a bottle of wine, and a hot fudge sundae. For someone who could consume that much in one go, the idea of stopping to freshen up afterward probably wasn't a priority. Hygiene took a back seat to indulgence. And since she had assistants who would eventually take care of cleaning up, she didn't have to think about it. Her drinking habits were just as extreme. You see, she wasn't a casual drinker. She could polish off an entire bottle of vodka in one night. Alcoholism often leads to a disregard for personal hygiene, with heavy drinkers skipping showers, forgetting to brush their teeth, and re-wearing dirty clothes simply because they're too tired or too intoxicated to care. Taylor was known to lounge in bed drinking for hours, and it wouldn't have been surprising if she woke up in the same clothes from the night before, hungover and uninterested in freshening up. Alcohol also causes dehydration, sweat, and body odor, and there were claims that rather than bathing, she would simply cover up any smell with perfume before making a public appearance. Her painkiller addiction only made matters worse. She had suffered from multiple injuries and back problems, leading to years of prescription pain medication use. Painkillers can leave people feeling sluggish and disconnected, making basic tasks like showering, brushing teeth, and changing clothes feel like a chore. It's possible that during her worst moments, her assistants had to encourage her to clean up. Painkillers also cause dry mouth and dental problems, which could explain why she was rumored to have bad breath and neglected brushing her teeth. If she was heavily medicated, daily hygiene was probably the last thing on her mind. The biggest problem with addiction is how it drains a person's motivation, creating a cycle of neglect. Elizabeth Taylor had multiple stays in rehab, meaning there were periods where she was really struggling just to function. Addiction often leads to depression, which in turn causes people to avoid daily hygiene, stay in bed for long periods, and wear the same clothes repeatedly without washing them. If she was going through a particularly bad phase, she likely let her hair go unwashed for days, skipped showers, and re-wore stained clothing simply because she didn't have the energy to care. At her best, she was glamorous and polished, but at her worst, she was someone who ignored basic self-care in favor of indulgence. She was never the type to obsess over cleanliness like other Hollywood stars. And when she was deep into an addiction cycle, hygiene probably didn't even cross her mind. She lived a life of luxury and excess, but behind closed doors, she was dealing with struggles that made basic grooming and cleanliness feel like an afterthought.
Considering how much she achieved in her 6-decade-long career, it is easy to think Elizabeth Taylor's life was a jolly ride with diamonds and shiny Hollywood glamour. And to an extent, this is true. But then she's also been known to have had an unhappy childhood and a long list of health problems. She lost people she held dear to her and went through abuse in not just 1, but 2 of her marriages. Sadly, these only got worse at the end of her life. Health problems that led to addictions as well as strange behaviors that could only be the result of unresolved mental health issues and a deeply lonely life. This is the rise and fall of Elizabeth Taylor, an isolated childhood. When Liz appeared in the 1947 movie Life with Father, she posed for a rather inappropriate publicity photo that remains today. Just 15 at the time, the picture showed Taylor in a low-cut dress, reclining on a couch with a suggestive look on her face. The picture would be one of many. At this point in her life, she all but had no connection with her parents. Her mother had begun grooming her for her acting career when she was 9, and she had begun to live full-time on the MGM studio lot since she was 12. Even her education took place on the studio lot. Young Elizabeth Taylor had no friends of her age, and she spent even more time hanging out with horses and dogs than with actual people. Not long after she turned 18, Liz Taylor got married to hotel heir Conrad Hilton. While there are speculations that the marriage was a publicity stunt for her next movie, Father of the Bride, it is likely the young actress was simply trying to escape a heavily controlled life. Sadly, her marriage to Conrad Hilton ended just after 8 months. But what Liz didn't know was how her acting would inspire one of the biggest fashion movements of the century, Egyptomania. In 1922, British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered the 3,000-year-old tomb of the Egyptian king Tutankhamun and kicked off the Egyptology craze of the 20th century. There were art exhibitions and rumors of a killing curse that plagued those who got too close. A few decades later, Elizabeth Taylor starred in the 1963 movie Cleopatra. Liz Taylor's career was at its peak in the 50s and 60s, a household name known for her roles in classics like Giant and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. But Cleopatra was different. The film was such a blockbuster hit that it began a cultural revolution and started what is now known as the Egyptian fashion craze, or Egyptomania. Women everywhere began to imitate Elizabeth Taylor's signature wig and eye makeup, especially the winged eyeliner that is popular to this day. There were crash diets and plastic surgeries. Egyptian-inspired jewelry was the moment, and designers like Halston and Yves Saint Laurent rolled out Egyptomania collections. However, while Taylor's career grew at an astonishing rate, her personal life suffered greatly. One fateful day, while married to U.S. Senator John Warner, Liz Taylor called her son Christopher Wilding into her bedroom and, holding a syringe, asked him to help inject her with an opioid known as Demerol. He refused, and to his horror, watched as his mother shot up. Not long after, the family held a bedside intervention for the actress and sent her off to rehab. You must be wondering how she ended up an addict. But before we answer that question, make sure to like and subscribe to this channel if you don't want to miss videos, just like this one. The fall of Elizabeth Taylor. Now, back to the video. One truth everyone agrees on about Liz Taylor is that she was a very beautiful woman and a powerful actress. She appeared on and off the screen for 60 years, and she won many career awards including 2 Oscars, 4 Golden Globes, and 1 BAFTA. But she was a little unlucky in the love department. Her first husband, Conrad Hilton Jr., was very abusive. He was an alcoholic and even went as far as beating her on multiple occasions. The marriage lasted less than a year before she married her next husband, Michael Wilding, in 1952. The two of them had a 20-year age difference, and things went pretty well until Michael Wilding got tired of the public attention. Afterwards, she fell in love with big-time producer Mike Todd. Then he, unfortunately, passed away in 1958. Next, Elizabeth did something shocking when she got married to her late husband's best friend, Eddie Fisher. This marriage in particular was a huge scandal, and the public scrutiny Liz got from it remained throughout her life. This was because at the time, Fisher was very much married to another young actress, Debbie Reynolds, who was also Liz Taylor's friend. To make things worse, Fisher and Liz Taylor's marriage didn't go very well. It is reported that Eddie Fisher was emotionally abusive towards Elizabeth as he was a very possessive and jealous man. While Liz Taylor dealt with abusive or dead husbands as well as the harsh judgment of the press and the public, her health steadily declined. The actress was born with scoliosis. She also had multiple accidents while filming, such as the time she fell off a horse while filming National Velvet. Liz Taylor was also an insomniac. In December of 1983, while in the hospital for a bowel obstruction, Liz Taylor's family held an intervention in her hospital room. Not long after that intervention, she became the first celebrity guest at the Betty Ford Center for Drug and Alcohol Rehabilitation in California. The same rehab center would later welcome Mary Tyler Moore, Johnny Cash, and even Liz's friend Liza Minnelli. A biography report states that 3 of Elizabeth's doctors wrote a combined 1,000 prescriptions for 28 drugs between 1983 and 1988. These drugs included tranquilizers, sleeping pills, and painkillers. It was bad enough that a doctor going through her medical file assumed she was dead because of how lethal the doses were. Elizabeth spent 7 weeks in rehab after her family begged her to. However, she had to return not long after the death of her ex-husband Richard Burton. It was on this second trip to rehab that Liz met Larry Fortensky, a 37-year-old construction worker and recovering alcoholic. Elizabeth's use of painkillers was arguably necessary as the actress was constantly in pain. She had over 19 major surgeries throughout her life, including a partial hysterectomy and brain surgery. Sadly, Elizabeth Taylor died in 2011, still fighting her addictions at the age of 79 due to congestive heart failure. Her legacy. Despite her addiction, Liz Taylor was known by all to be a kind and loving soul until the end of her life. You could say she had a reputation for taking in strays, both animal and human. One memorable example of this was her support for Rock Hudson. After the closeted gay actor got sick with AIDS and was rejected by everyone he knew in Hollywood, Elizabeth openly spoke in support of him until the time he died. Another interesting Liz Taylor story is that the actress once sold exclusive photos of her 8th and last wedding with Larry Fortensky to the national and international press. The press was desperate enough to send 10 helicopters to circle the venue, and so they were willing to pay millions of dollars for the pictures. Liz Taylor donated every cent to AIDS charities, a cause she was very passionate about if you didn't count the diamonds and perfumes. Another legacy we will always remember about Elizabeth Taylor is that she was quite the businesswoman. When she did Cleopatra, Taylor made sure she was paid $1 million. At the time, this was the most any actor had ever been paid in the history of Hollywood. Her perfume business was also a huge hit. Most big celebrities use their popularity to make money outside of acting, but she was the first to do it successfully. The first was in 1987. Elizabeth released her first perfume, Passion, with a 30-day promotional tour in 9 cities across the USA. Her White Diamonds perfume, which she released in 1991, was the best-selling celebrity fragrance in the entire world for many years. It sold $61.3 million in 2010 alone. The auction sale for her jewelry collection also broke records when it sold for $157 million in 2012. What's Liz Taylor's memory do you find most extraordinary? Let us know in the comments section below.
Elizabeth Taylor married 7 times, and the whole world watched every single one. Her love life wasn't just public, it was global entertainment. But deep inside the House of Taylor Estate archive, among thousands of private letters and diary entries, there may be evidence of one love she never let the cameras see, a devotion she carried quietly to March 2011, when her heart finally gave out. The question isn't whether Elizabeth Taylor loved deeply, it's whether the world ever knew who she loved most. In 1944, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer released a film that permanently altered the machinery of modern celebrity. A 12-year-old girl named Elizabeth Taylor rode a horse to victory in national velvet, and almost overnight, the child became the property of the global public. MGM had captured something rare on celluloid, but the cost to the young actress was immediate and absolute. From that moment on, her childhood, her physical development, and her private thoughts were tracked, packaged, and sold to millions of fans. The studio system of mid-century Hollywood functioned as a totalizing force. Stars did not simply work for MGM, they were molded, monitored, and policed by executive decree. For Taylor, this meant growing up in an artificial environment where every smile was lit by flashbulbs and every personal milestone was scripted by studio publicists. The young girl who loved animals and sought quiet spaces was quickly eclipsed by a screen legend whose face defined an era. She became a major financial asset for the studio, an international icon subject to relentless lifelong scrutiny. This extreme exposure created an inevitable, permanent division in her life. To survive under the constant glare of the cameras, she had to build a wall between the magnificent woman the world saw on theater screens and the actual person who lived behind closed doors. The public demanded to know everything, tracking her appearance, her clothing, and her personal associates with forensic intensity. In response, Taylor learned the art of absolute discretion. She discovered early that the only way to keep anything truly precious, whether a private thought, a deep hurt, or a genuine devotion, was to keep it completely out of sight. For over half a century, the public believed they owned her. They bought the movie tickets, read the tabloid headlines, and assumed they knew every corner of her heart. But the girl who grew up under the MGM spot lamps understood that some truths were too fragile for the harsh light of Hollywood. The world saw the glittering, carefully managed exterior, but her real story was always unfolding in the quiet, unguarded spaces she spent a lifetime protecting. 7 husbands, 8 ceremonies, a public tally that the global public tracked like box office numbers. Elizabeth Taylor's romantic history was far more than a personal life. It existed as a decades-long theatrical production, staged in the full glare of the international media. Every marriage, every divorce, and every reunion was instantly packaged as public entertainment, transforming her private vulnerability into a highly profitable commodity. The emotional architecture of this public myth was built on 2 distinct pillars. The first was established in 1957 when Taylor married the brilliant, high-rolling film producer Mike Todd. Todd was a force of nature, a legendary showman who showered her with diamonds, private jets, and an intensity of affection she had never experienced. For 13 spectacular months, they lived at the absolute summit of mid-century Hollywood glamour. Then, in March 1958, Todd's private plane, named the Lucky Liz, crashed in a New Mexico storm. The tragedy devastated Taylor, leaving her a widow at 26. Todd became her first great emotional benchmark, the romantic gold standard of her youth against which all other men would be measured. But Hollywood demanded a second act. In 1961, Taylor arrived in Rome to film the monumental epic Cleopatra and met her match in the magnetic Welsh actor Richard Burton. Their first on-screen kiss lasted long after the director called cut, launching a decade of high society scandal, dual marriages, divorces, and remarriages. The world watched, transfixed, as Burton gifted her some of the most famous gemstones on Earth, including the 33-carat Krupp diamond and the spectacular 68-carat Taylor Burton diamond. Together they came to define modern celebrity romance, tempestuous, brilliant, and hopelessly public. It was a relationship so large, it occupied its own orbit, cementing the idea that Burton was the ultimate destination of her heart. For nearly 50 years, biographers and fans alike assumed this romantic ledger was complete. Todd was the tragic lost youth. Burton was the tempestuous soulmate. This absolute public certainty is precisely what makes the prospect of a hidden final attachment so disruptive. If Taylor carried a secret, unpublicized love through her final decades, it would do more than add a footnote to her biography. It would challenge everything the world believed it knew about her. It would mean that behind the 7 husbands, the spectacular diamond rings, and the endless tabloid headlines, the true center of Elizabeth Taylor's emotional life remained entirely, beautifully out of reach. On February 9, 2011, Elizabeth Taylor gave what would be her final public interview. Conducted by Kim Kardashian for Harper's Bazaar, the conversation allowed the aging icon to address her global audience one last time. Her remarks were reflective, focusing on her family, her career, and her philosophy on life. When the topic turned to her famously turbulent romantic past, Taylor responded with characteristic grace. She stated that she never planned to acquire a lot of jewels or a lot of husbands. She described herself as supremely lucky to have known great love and advised readers to follow their passion and follow their hearts so the things they need would come. Yet the absolute silence within these final public remarks is what defines the mystery. In the official transcript, there is no mention of an unknown lover, no hidden name dropped in confidence, and no sudden confession of a secret romance. Throughout her final year, every statement she authorized remained entirely consistent with her established biography. She praised the loves the world already knew, but she left no public clue of any other. This absence of a formal confession establishes a major gap between the rumors that later emerged and the actual documented record. Biographers can analyze every syllable she uttered in her final months, but they will find no attributable statement naming an undisclosed partner. Elizabeth Taylor kept the boundary between her public persona and her private reality perfectly intact. The record she left behind is clean, deliberate, and entirely devoid of the sensational revelations the public craved. She exited the stage precisely as she had lived on it, entirely on her own terms, leaving her ultimate secrets safely out of reach. In early March 2011, Elizabeth Taylor was admitted to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. The diagnosis was congestive heart failure, a battle her body had been fighting for years. This hospital room, heavily guarded and closed to the public, became the setting for her final weeks. If a secret love existed, if there was a name she had held close to her chest for decades, it had to have surfaced within this narrow, high-stakes window of time. The atmosphere inside the hospital suite was thick with quiet exhaustion and enduring loyalty. Her longtime friend, songwriter Carol Bayer Sager, visited to say goodbye, remembering Taylor in immense physical pain but holding on to her sharp wit. Debbie Reynolds, who had lived through decades of shared Hollywood history with Taylor, recalled the heavy acceptance that hung in the room. This was not a space for publicity stunts or carefully managed press releases. It was a sanctuary of raw emotion and impending loss. At the bedside, her 4 children, Liza, Todd, Maria, and Michael, maintained a constant vigil. They watched over their mother as her 79-year-old body began to fail. In these quiet, late-night hours, she was surrounded only by those she trusted completely, including her close assistant, Tim Mendelsohn. When the end arrived in the early hours of March 25, 2011, the world lost its last great screen legend. The timeline of her life was officially locked. Any final confession, any parting letter, or any whispered name had to have happened right here, in the silence of those last 25 days. The truth of Elizabeth Taylor's private life does not rely on hearsay. It is recorded in paper, ink, and estate inventories. The House of Taylor Archive, managed today by trustees Quinn Tivy, Tim Mendelsohn, and Barbara Berkowitz, serves as the ultimate gatekeeper of her personal history. This physical repository contains over 7,000 personal letters and 10,000 individual diary entries. When biographer Kate Anderson Brower received unprecedented access to this massive collection for her 2022 authorized biography, Elizabeth Taylor, the grit and glamour of an icon, investigators and fans anticipated the unveiling of an unpublicized romantic partner. Yet the exhaustive examination of these private papers yielded no evidence of an undisclosed lifelong lover. Instead, the most passionate, vulnerable correspondence within the archive belongs strictly to the men the world already knew. The collection holds 66 pristine, deeply personal letters exchanged in 1949 with her teenage fiancé, William Pauley. It preserves the raw devotion of her brief marriage to Mike Todd and the highly charged handwritten notes sent to Richard Burton. These documents are used with permission where required, and all living parties are identified only with their explicit consent. Beyond the private archive, the public chain of custody is anchored by the historic December 2011 Christie's auction. This 4-night event generated $115.9 million, cataloging 80 distinct lots of her most treasured jewelry, couture, and fine art. Each item was subjected to rigorous legal and historical vetting, yet not a single lot description or provenance note indicated the existence of an anonymous benefactor or a secret partner. While the estate's private inventory did withhold certain restricted items from the public sale to protect financial and personal confidentiality, no authenticated record has ever surfaced to support the rumor of a hidden romance. A documented history of public devotion remains entirely distinct from an undisclosed affair. Elizabeth Taylor's paper trail is dense, precise, and remarkably consistent. It reveals a woman who lived her passions openly, leaving behind a wealth of evidence that confirms the names we know, while leaving no room for the ghosts of an untold romance. The machinery of mid-century stardom was designed to manufacture fantasy, but its most powerful function was containment. In the old studio system, a star's public identity operated as a multi-million-dollar corporate asset, heavily policed by executive decree and ironclad moral clauses. For an actress of Elizabeth Taylor's stature, maintaining absolute control over her private life was a stark financial and social necessity. Throughout her career, the stakes of disclosure remained exceptionally high. Personal relationships carried massive implications for studio contracts, brand endorsements, and complex divorce settlements. Apart from the financial machinery, family dynamics demanded a shield of absolute discretion. With 4 children growing up under the unyielding gaze of the international media, the pressure to protect her household from invasive press coverage remained a constant, daily reality. In this environment, keeping an intimate relationship entirely out of the headlines was highly plausible. Discretion was a survival mechanism in a world where private vulnerability was routinely commodified. Yet, understanding how a secret could be kept is different from proving that one existed. While the pressures of fame explain why a private relationship would remain hidden, any such claim must still face the cold, objective standard of documented proof. To move a relationship from the realm of gossip into historical fact requires a specific, unyielding standard of proof. In the study of a life as heavily documented as Elizabeth Taylor's, a rumor, no matter how compelling or widely repeated, cannot stand on its own. For any claim of an undisclosed final love to be accepted as historical truth, it must meet a strict, 4-part evidentiary threshold. First, there must be clear provenance, an uninterrupted, verified chain of custody tracing an object, letter, or diary directly to Taylor. Second, any written document must pass forensic handwriting analysis, compared systematically against known samples of her penmanship from the estate's archives. Third, independent contemporaneous records must corroborate the dates and locations of the relationship. And fourth, the trustees of her estate must verify that the item is a genuine, unredacted part of her personal record. When these strict standards are applied to the rumors surrounding Taylor's final days, the narrative of a hidden partner falls apart. The thousands of personal letters, the extensive diary entries, and the detailed inventories of her estate do not produce a single authenticated record of an undisclosed companion. Tabloid headlines and speculative articles often trade hard proof for emotional appeal, inviting us to believe in a secret romance simply because it fits the dramatic mythology of a screen legend. But a claim without a primary source remains nothing more than a claim. When the authentication standards are applied, the forensic evidence yields a definitive result. The only great romantic devotions Elizabeth Taylor carried to her grave were the ones she had already lived in the open. Today, the archives of Hollywood's golden era remain tightly guarded. The ultimate mystery is not which name she whispered in her final hours, but that a woman who lived entirely in the spotlight managed to keep her deepest truth for herself. Her final silence remains her greatest victory. Was it Burton or someone else? Share your thoughts below.
Elizabeth Taylor didn't just captivate Hollywood, she conquered it. Men across the globe were mesmerized, drawn to her like moths to a flame. She wasn't just a star, She was a force of nature, commanding the hearts of the world's most powerful men. But what made her so irresistible? It wasn't just her beauty or her talent on screen. Those were merely pieces of a puzzle. There was something deeper, something far more magnetic about her. So what turned Elizabeth Taylor into the ultimate symbol of desire? Easy on the eyes. Can you imagine walking into a room and instantly stealing every ounce of attention with no effort required? That was Elizabeth Taylor's superpower. She didn't just turn heads, she commanded the gaze of everyone around her, and it wasn't just because she was beautiful. No, Elizabeth Taylor's beauty was in a league of its own. Those violet eyes, pure magic. They weren't just rare, they were almost mythical. People didn't just glance at her, they stared, mesmerized by the way her eyes seemed to shift with the light, like they held secrets only she could tell. And let's not forget her otherworldly features. The flawless porcelain skin, the perfectly arched brows, the full lips that made every smile look like it belonged on the cover of a romance novel. It wasn't just her face, though. It was the way she carried herself. She had this regal air about her, like she knew she was extraordinary but didn't need to say it out loud. She let her beauty do all the talking. In an era when Hollywood was obsessed with finding the perfect face, Elizabeth was it. She wasn't the typical blonde bombshell or the girl next door type. She was exotic, striking, almost intimidating in her perfection. Directors and photographers couldn't get enough of her, and men, forget about it. They were absolutely captivated, not just by how she looked, but by how her beauty seemed untouchable yet utterly inviting at the same time. Her look set the standard for glamour in her era, inspiring countless imitators but no real equals. She wasn't just admired, she was studied. Every actress wanted to be her, and every man wanted to be with her. Her beauty wasn't just a gift, it was her weapon, her currency, and her legacy. And let's be honest, if you saw Elizabeth Taylor walk into a room, you'd probably forget what you were doing too. That's just the kind of effect she had. Her incredible passion. Elizabeth Taylor wasn't just a pretty face. She was a force to be reckoned with on screen. While her beauty could have easily been her only ticket to stardom, Elizabeth had something more: talent. Raw, unfiltered, magnetic talent that made you forget everything else when she was acting. When she stepped onto a set, she didn't just play a role, she became it, pouring every ounce of her fiery personality into her characters. Take Cleopatra, for example. Sure, it was the most expensive movie ever made at the time, but Elizabeth didn't let the grandeur of the production outshine her. She was Cleopatra, seductive, commanding, and utterly unforgettable. That confidence, the way she owned the role, wasn't just acting, it was power. Men were mesmerized by how effortlessly she dominated the screen, exuding authority and allure in every scene. Then there's Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, where she played the fiery, complicated Maggie. That movie gave audiences a masterclass in Elizabeth's ability to navigate emotional turmoil with grace and intensity. She captured the desperation and passion of a woman fighting for her marriage, making it impossible not to root for her. Men couldn't get enough of her boldness, her ability to show vulnerability without losing an ounce of strength. And let's not forget Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. If anyone doubted her acting chops before, this film shut them up for good. As Martha, she was raw, messy, and brutally honest, stripping away every trace of glamour to reveal the depth of her skill. She wasn't afraid to get ugly, emotionally and physically, in a way that demanded respect. It was a role that cemented her reputation as one of the greatest actresses of all time. What made Elizabeth's performances so captivating wasn't just her technique, it was her passion. You could tell she cared deeply about the characters she played, and that authenticity resonated with audiences. Men admired her for more than her beauty. They were drawn to her confidence, her intelligence, and the sheer intensity she brought to every role. Elizabeth wasn't just acting, she was living her art, and in doing so, she captured hearts and minds in a way few ever have. She lived on the edge. When you look at her life, it is not just enough to say Elizabeth Taylor lived on the edge. She was the edge. She thrived on pushing boundaries, both in her personal life and in the public eye, and men couldn't help but be intrigued by her audacious spirit. This wasn't a woman who played by the rules, and that rebellious streak made her irresistible. Her relationships alone could have filled volumes. From stealing Eddie Fisher from Debbie Reynolds, a scandal that rocked Hollywood, to her tumultuous, passionate marriage to Richard Burton, Elizabeth made headlines like no one else. She wasn't afraid to chase love, no matter how messy or controversial it was, and while critics were quick to call her out, men admired her audacity. Here was a woman who didn't apologize for living life on her terms. Her love life wasn't just scandalous, it was epic. 8 marriages to 7 men, each more dramatic than the last, made Elizabeth the ultimate femme fatale. Yet it wasn't just the sheer number of romances. It was the intensity of them. She loved hard, fought hard, and lived hard, creating a whirlwind of passion that was both alluring and intoxicating. Men couldn't get enough of the fire she brought to her relationships, even if it often burned out of control. But it wasn't just about the drama. Elizabeth's scandals highlighted her humanity. She wasn't trying to project an image of perfection. Instead, she embraced her flaws, her desires, and her mistakes, all while refusing to let society dictate how she should live. That fearless approach to life made her even more attractive. She was unpredictable, exciting, and unapologetically herself, a combination that kept men captivated and the world talking. Elizabeth Taylor didn't just captivate hearts, she ignited them. Her scandals weren't just tabloid fodder, they were proof of her refusal to conform, and for men that rebellious streak was nothing short of electrifying. Her refined taste. Her taste for the finer things was legendary, and it was impossible not to be captivated by the sheer extravagance of her world. From the moment she entered Hollywood, Elizabeth embraced luxury with open arms, and her unapologetic indulgence became part of her allure. First, there were the diamonds. Oh, the diamonds. Elizabeth's jewelry collection wasn't just impressive, it was iconic. Men were mesmerized by the way she carried herself, dripping in jewels like they were extensions of her own charm. The famous 33-carat Krupp diamond and the jaw-dropping 69-carat Taylor Burton diamond weren't just accessories, they were symbols of her power and allure. She didn't just wear them, she owned them, commanding attention with every sparkle. Her homes were just as grand as her jewels. Lavish estates, jet-setting vacations, and opulent parties were all part of the Elizabeth Taylor experience. She wasn't afraid to flaunt her wealth, and men admired the way she turned luxury into an art form. Elizabeth's lifestyle was a fantasy, the kind of glamorous existence most people could only dream about. But it wasn't just about material possessions. Elizabeth's love for the good life was matched by her generosity. She used her wealth and fame to champion causes close to her heart, most notably her trailblazing work in HIV/AIDS advocacy. Men were drawn to the way she balanced indulgence with compassion, proving that she wasn't just glamorous, she was also deeply human. Her lavish lifestyle wasn't just about excess, it was about embracing life to the fullest. Elizabeth Taylor knew how to make an entrance, leave an impression, and create memories that would last a lifetime. For men, she wasn't just a movie star, she was a living, breathing embodiment of glamour, passion, and indulgence. Who wouldn't be enchanted by that? She was independent. In an era when women were often expected to play supporting roles, both on-screen and in life, Elizabeth unapologetically took center stage. She was bold, confident, and completely unwilling to conform to societal expectations. Her career choices reflected this unyielding independence. Elizabeth wasn't content to be just another Hollywood beauty. She fought for complex, challenging roles that showcased her talent. When she became the first actress to command a $1 million paycheck for Cleopatra, it wasn't just a financial milestone, it was a statement. Elizabeth knew her worth, and she demanded to be treated as the powerhouse she was. In her personal life, she defied conventions at every turn. From marrying the same man twice, Richard Burton, of course, to walking away from relationships that no longer served her, Elizabeth made decisions that prioritized her happiness and self-respect. Men were captivated by this unapologetic confidence. She wasn't waiting for anyone to save her. Elizabeth was her own knight in shining armor. Even in her later years, she continued to blaze her own trail. She became a successful entrepreneur with her groundbreaking fragrance line, proving that her talent extended far beyond the silver screen. And let's not forget her tireless activism, where she used her platform to raise millions for HIV/AIDS research. She wasn't just independent, she was impactful. Elizabeth Taylor's independence wasn't just a trait, it was her essence. She showed the world that a woman could be glamorous, talented, and fiercely self-reliant all at once. For men, that combination of beauty and strength was magnetic. She was a force of nature, and they couldn't help but be drawn to her unshakable spirit. Her amazing confidence. Elizabeth Taylor exuded confidence that was utterly magnetic, the kind that turned heads and commanded a room the moment she walked in. For men, this quality was irresistible, an intoxicating blend of poise, self-assurance, and charm that made her stand out in a crowd. From a young age, Elizabeth carried herself with an air of certainty that belied her years. She knew who she was and what she brought to the table, whether she was dazzling on screen as Cleopatra or holding her own in the complex emotional depths of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. She always radiated a sense of control. Men admired how she seemed utterly at ease with herself, embracing her identity unapologetically. Her confidence wasn't just about how she looked, though her beauty certainly played a part. It was her ability to use her presence as a kind of armor, wielding it as both a tool of seduction and a shield against criticism. Elizabeth had her share of public scrutiny, from her tumultuous relationships to her battles with addiction and illness. Yet, she never shied away from the spotlight or let the opinions of others dictate her choices. This self-assuredness extended to her personal life, where she refused to compromise on love or ambition. Elizabeth didn't just date or marry, she lived boldly, unapologetically chasing her passions and desires. Men were captivated by her ability to own her narrative, even when it was messy or controversial. In a world that often tried to box women in, Elizabeth Taylor stood out as a woman who created her own definition of success, beauty, and happiness. That unshakable confidence was magnetic, drawing men and the world to her like moths to a flame. It wasn't just her beauty or talent that left people mesmerized, it was her complete and utter belief in herself that, above all, made her unforgettable. Her sexy duality. You see, Elizabeth Taylor possessed a rare duality that men found utterly captivating. She was both approachable and unattainable. On one hand, she exuded a regal, larger-than-life presence that made her seem like royalty. On the other, she had a warm, down-to-earth charm that made her feel real and relatable. It was this blend of glamour and authenticity that created her magnetic pull. On screen, she portrayed queens, temptresses, and deeply flawed women with the kind of grandeur that made her unforgettable. Whether she was Cleopatra ruling over Egypt or Maggie fighting for her place in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Elizabeth had an intensity that was impossible to ignore. Men were drawn to the commanding power she wielded, as if she could control the entire world with just a glance. But off-screen, Elizabeth wasn't just the untouchable goddess. She had a genuine warmth and wit that made people feel connected to her. She laughed with abandon, spoke her mind, and had a playful sense of humor that caught people off guard. Men loved how she could be both fierce and fun, someone who could hold her own in an argument but also throw her head back and laugh like a carefree girl. This duality extended to her romantic life, where she was both the heartbreaker and the heartbroken. Men admired her passion and vulnerability, seeing in her a woman who loved fiercely and lived authentically, even when it came with risks. Elizabeth's ability to balance these two sides, divine and human, untouchable and approachable, was a key part of her allure. She wasn't just a star, she was a paradox, and for men, that made her utterly irresistible. She wasn't one thing or the other, she was everything all at once, and that, perhaps, was her greatest charm. She had a big heart. Beyond the beauty of Hollywood life, Elizabeth Taylor had a heart as big as her stardom, and men admired her deeply for it. She wasn't content with being just a screen legend. She wanted to make a difference. Her tireless advocacy for AIDS awareness and research in a time when it was considered taboo showcased her compassion, bravery, and unwavering commitment to justice. Elizabeth's activism wasn't a publicity stunt or a fleeting interest. She threw herself into the fight with the same passion she brought to her iconic roles. In 1985, she co-founded the American Foundation for AIDS Research, AAMFAR, becoming one of the first celebrities to speak out on behalf of those affected by the disease. At a time when much of society turned its back on the AIDS epidemic, Elizabeth was a beacon of hope and a fierce advocate for change. Her humanitarian efforts weren't just impressive, they were deeply personal. Elizabeth didn't shy away from standing beside those who were marginalized or stigmatized, showing empathy and determination that inspired millions. For men, her activism highlighted an entirely different side of her, a woman who wasn't just beautiful or talented, but also deeply kind and courageous. What made her efforts even more appealing was how genuine they were. Elizabeth wasn't afraid to use her platform to raise money, awareness, and support for causes she believed in, even when it was controversial. Her willingness to speak truth to power, to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves, and to do so with grace and passion, made her all the more extraordinary. Elizabeth Taylor's legacy isn't just about her iconic roles or stunning beauty, it's about the impact she made off-screen, proving that her heart was just as captivating as her talent. For men who admired her, this combination of glamour and grit was nothing short of awe-inspiring. She is timeless. One of the biggest reasons men loved Elizabeth Taylor was her ability to transcend time. Decades after her rise to fame, she remained just as captivating, continuously reinventing herself and leaving a lasting legacy that extended far beyond her acting career. Her stunning beauty and remarkable talent made her a global star, but it was her ability to remain relevant, to stay in the public eye and still be adored, that made her a true icon. She wasn't just a star of her time, she became a symbol of Hollywood glamour and the epitome of feminine allure for generations to come. Even after she transitioned from acting to focus on her humanitarian work, Elizabeth's name still carried weight. Men looked to her as the ultimate symbol of both classic beauty and modern resilience. She had this rare ability to hold attention, whether she was gracing the silver screen in her youth or advocating for causes later in life. What made her timeless was her authenticity, her ability to stay true to herself despite the ever-changing landscape of Hollywood and the world. Elizabeth's personal evolution reflected the many phases of life, from glamorous movie star to passionate activist, from beloved icon to matriarch of her own extraordinary legacy. Through all of it, she remained unforgettable. Men admired this enduring quality in her. She wasn't a fleeting trend or someone who faded into obscurity. Elizabeth Taylor became, and remains, the benchmark of timeless beauty, class, and grace. No matter the era, she was a star that never lost her shine, a woman who defied time and continued to captivate hearts, proving that true icons only grow more legendary with age. Her strength in chaos. Men were drawn to her not only because of her beauty and talent, but because she represented a woman who loved fiercely and didn't shy away from the raw complexities of life. Her 8 marriages, including 2 to the love of her life, Richard Burton, became a hallmark of her existence. Their love story, passionate, dramatic, and full of ups and downs, captivated the public. While many viewed Elizabeth as a symbol of eternal romance, she was also a symbol of heartbreak, as her personal life unfolded in the public eye. Men admired her resilience in the face of such public turmoil. They saw a woman who didn't just love, she loved with intensity, with authenticity, and without fear. But it wasn't just her relationships with men that made her story so compelling. Elizabeth experienced the death of friends, family, and, eventually, some of the loves of her life. Through it all, she remained a figure of fascination, not only for her physical beauty, but for the emotional depth she exuded. Men admired her ability to navigate the emotional complexities of life with dignity, even when it felt like her heart was broken. Her vulnerability in the face of these experiences was part of what made her so attractive. Elizabeth Taylor wasn't a woman who hid her pain. She was real, raw, and unapologetically human, and that, for men, made her even more alluring. They saw her as a symbol of how to love deeply, live fully, and endure even the most painful losses without letting them define you. Her complexity and the way she handled love, loss, and everything in between made Elizabeth Taylor a woman that men not only admired, but genuinely respected. She wasn't just a Hollywood legend. She was a woman who lived her life unapologetically, showing the world the beauty in both love and loss. Her style. Another major reason why men were drawn to Elizabeth Taylor was her impeccable and unforgettable style. She wasn't just a trendsetter, she became synonymous with glamour and elegance. Whether it was the stunning gowns she wore on the red carpet, her ability to carry off even the boldest fashion choices, or the effortless way she exuded sophistication, Elizabeth Taylor's sense of style made her a standout. She was always ahead of the curve in terms of fashion, and her wardrobe became iconic. Her love for luxurious jewelry, particularly her famous collection of diamonds, made her even more alluring. Perhaps the most famous of all was the Taylor Burton diamond, a 33.19-carat diamond Richard Burton gave her after their marriage, a gift that captured her larger-than-life persona perfectly. It wasn't just her clothing that made her a style icon. It was her ability to wear them with grace and confidence that drew men to her. What really set Elizabeth apart was how she used her style as an extension of her personality. She didn't just wear the latest trends, she made them her own. From her trademark bold brows to her glamorous updos, every aspect of her appearance was carefully crafted to enhance her natural beauty and convey her strength, passion, and status. Men admired how effortlessly she combined glamour with authenticity. It wasn't about the clothes, it was about how she owned them. Her style wasn't just about external beauty, it spoke to the way she saw herself and wanted the world to see her. Elizabeth understood the power of appearance and the impact of a well-executed look, and she used it to her advantage. That mastery of self-presentation made her not just a beautiful woman, but a truly unforgettable one. Her signature style made her a lasting symbol of elegance and sophistication, one that men would continue to admire long after her passing. Whether in film or in public life, Elizabeth Taylor's fashion choices were as captivating as her performances, securing her place as one of the most stylish women to ever grace the Hollywood stage.
Giovanni Jackson, Daddy's Girl,